Let's come back here to the set. We're currently discussing in terms of the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. Its reconstitution, is it being faced by a constitutional crisis without commissioners in place, especially following that Court of Appeal ruling that was made last week in terms of changing nominated MCAs from Uasin Gishu, 9 of them from their positions, and gazette afresh a new list of nominated MCAs of a UDA party. Does the Secretariat, which is currently led by the Chief Executive Officer, that is Hussein Marjan, have the capacity or have the mandate to carry out that particular and implement that court ruling that was made? Joining me this particular morning to make sense of this is Maliba Arnold, who is a strategic communication advisor to the UDA party. I don't want to put you on the spot given that you're already in the UDA party. Have you been able to converse this issue of these 9 nominated MCAs? You just heard from the Court of Appeal last week. They clearly directed IEBC from 9 MCAs that were listed to hold those positions be changed to 9 others.
Well, the decision of gazetting is actually at the level of the commission. As far as I know, I do not think that the Secretariat on their own can actually carry that. You know that we actually have got pending elections. I think about 5 at the moment, and with that, that then leaves us to wait until we are done with the political processes that are ongoing, and then of course be able to constitute. You will remember that the president had put in place sometime last year a selection panel, and then at the height of the demonstrations and the complaints, he gave way, and you will realize that it's now going to a year. We have got Kenyans who are not represented. We are denying them a chance to be represented. It is their democratic chance, right? And we've done away with that because somehow, probably a section of society feels like the process of putting IEBC in place should actually a little bit hold on. I think last year it was tactically to try and cause and force a constitutional crisis. But I think that in this year, it's very important that we have got IEBC in place so that then we move away from what we are now seeing. We've got not just by-elections that should be carried out. Now, simple tasks like gazetting a new list, because they already have got a list, you know, because that is election by nomination. They already have got a list. So with that direction, then you will leave that to IEBC to do that. But I do not think we've gotten to the apex of that issue. There's still possibility that the other people could actually go higher. And of course, as you're talking about, it's not just about the by-elections or gazetting this 9 MCAs list of UDA party from Uasin Gishu County. It's also about, Maliba, the boundaries delimitation. This year, March 2024, it's supposed to be the deadline for that boundaries delimitation, and we're just closer to that particular deadline, yet we don't have commissioners. The selection panel that you're just talking about appeared before the National Dialogue Committee when it was in session last year. Late last year, they said we were carrying out the process despite the political glitch that they faced between the Kenya Kwanza as well as Azimio. Why do we, like as a country, choosing commissioners a month to the date or even a year to the election? I think that is a problem that has been around for some time, politically sometimes pushed by political actors who never are confident enough in the process. And one way of stalling the electoral process is always putting a comma or a glitch within the IEBC. Somehow you will realize that IEBC gets a lot of beating, most times for nothing. If you look around, you realize that political parties in and of themselves struggle to even do their own grassroots nominations and their own elections. So just imagine the kind of massive task that IEBC actually carries out. So, and you know, we need to go back to the old understanding and the truth that election is not an event. If we continue to treat election as an event, then we will continuously have the problems we have every election cycle. Election is actually a process. At the moment, we have got about 6 to 7 million people who should be registering as voters, but we've kept them out. Over a year, since we were in elections, you can't change your voters card. Even if your status has changed in society, you can't even register as a voter because there is no IEBC in place. So there's much more than just preparing for 2027, because 2027 started immediately after August 9th, 2022, because it's a whole cycle. The registration both of political parties, voters, then there is all those other processes, including the post-election report that came out. We've not even given it a little bit of focus. You realize that we've not discussed the report that was when I'm talking about discussing, is that having a national conversation on that. So it's neither wise, it's not safe for us to keep on doing the same things and then pushing the country, treating elections like it's some sort of an emergency, when we should actually be preparing for it several years before it gets there. Elections, like I said, is a process, it's not an event, but we've continuously treated elections as an event, and that is why a little bit of the problems we have during elections are out of this particular exercise or practice, because by now, if we had IEBC in place, the commissioners in place, they would get the experience, they would get the tooling, they would put the institution into place and prime everything. We have got, you've just spoken about boundary delimitation. March is not even the deadline. We actually were supposed to do it after a cycle of every 10 years. So when last did we do boundary delimitation? 2009? 2010?
Yes.
We should have done it much earlier in 2020. We didn't do that. So we are here. We actually are about 5 years late. Yeah.
And of course, before I get to the grassroots, you just touched on something very vital in terms of the illegalities that could be in place. Like, for example, what happened in Uasin Gishu. I know you're not a lawyer, but in terms of looking into the aspect of it all, it boils down to, in terms of implementing that particular ruling and complying with it. So in the list that was rejected by the Court of Appeal, if I was the nominated MCA, given that I know there are these loopholes, legal loopholes or a lacuna in law, why should I not stay in my position until IEBC is fully reconstituted?
Well, there are two ways. A court order applies to everybody.
Yes.
I know there's the Court of Appeal. If they have got any constitutional arguments, I will tell you that the affected people will actually go to the Supreme Court. And nowadays going to the Supreme Court is not as hard as it used to be. So I still think that if there is a threshold at a constitutional level, you will find them going up. That's why I'm a little bit waiting until I get to hear because I doubt they've exhausted the appeal room that actually exists. So they still have got an avenue over and above. Even IEBC will have to wait until that particular room is exhausted, or those involved no longer wish to pursue it, which I doubt is the case. So even as the party, we are waiting to actually see direction from that particular end. If what has come from COA is actually the final decision, then the party already submitted lists. There's not much to do to it. There's no new name coming in. There's already a list that exists, and it's done in a way that you don't necessarily have to have another fresh process of bringing somebody on board. If anything happened to those who are including what we now see now. Yeah.
Going now to the grassroots election, not just UDA party, Azimio as well, especially for the ODM party, is currently carrying out various recruitment drives across the country, as well as the UDA party. We do expect that this year will be their grassroots election. Most of these parties have opted for the options of working with IEBC to carry out these grassroots elections. Now, with no option with the IEBC, if the parties at the end of the day they conduct this grassroots election, are we not going to see what recurred every year in terms of those grassroots elections of chaos and push and pull between those people seeking those positions?
Well, UDA will be doing its grassroots elections on 13th, 19th and 26th of April. Now, working with IEBC, you don't have an option but to work with IEBC, because in political party membership, what the Office of the Registrar of Political Party recognizes is that you are not counted as as a proper member of a political party if you're not a registered voter. So, and who registers voters? It's IEBC. So at the end of the day, political parties have no option but to work with IEBC, because for compliance purposes, you need at least 1,000 members in at least half the counties. That is normally 24. Those members, the 1,000 we're talking about, must not only be people with IDs, they must also be people with who also have registered as voters with the IEBC. So the way ORPP checks out, or rather validates party membership, is by way of whoever is in the IEBC register. So you have no way other than going to IEBC and asking for a redacted voter register, so that you work with it sometimes when you go out. And at the end of the day, the people who are voting are Kenyans. So whether they are voting in a political party, whatever process, they are Kenyans. All of us are within the IEBC. So there is no alternative to working with the IEBC, actually. Yeah.
And of course, we saw even a legislator by the name Mandera North Member of Parliament, that is retired Brigadier Bashir. He was talking about changing the IEBC Acts in its entirety so that it can fit to purpose, so that if commissioners are not in place, IEBC itself, when it comes to the secretariat or even leave a commissioner there, they are able to carry out by-elections. This emanated from what happened in Banisa. You do know that that particular area, 10 months from now, they have not had a legislator following his untimely demise. Should we consider changing the IEBC Act in its entirety so that it gives us an option when commissioners are not there, such as now?
That then puts to question the role that the commissioners play in IEBC. That literally is the engine, it's the head. The secretariat is actually just the enabler. So rethinking IEBC to work that way is a good idea. But then why would we rework IEBC just to fit our bad manners? What has stopped us as a nation from actually having IEBC in place? There's nothing other than bad manners, political bad manners, nothing much. The president put in place a selection panel. We went out, there were demonstrations, there was destruction of property. Immediately he stopped and installed it. You can see a level of quiet, a level of calm. So it feels like there is a segment or a few individuals who want us to be in this particular situation, which is unfair, for example, to the people of Banisa. There are the 5 wards, about 4 wards also, that do not have members of parliament. So those Kenyans actually have to suffer at the behest of the whims of a few individuals, which is not very democratic in and of itself.
And of course, we're expecting answers from the National Dialogue Committee, which they submitted a report. They went further by just recommending that the selection panel be increased from 7 members all the way to 9 members. We're expecting, at least they would have said, the selection panel should carry on with their decision, but that has not happened. So in your view, Maliba, where you're seated, should the selection panel continue with their work?
Well, that's the decision the president will have to make, because at the moment, the person with that particular decision, coming up with the selection panel, was the president. He did that. He stopped the process to give dialogue a chance. We've had dialogue, but it's a year now. Just talk. I'd love you to actually probably engage the people of Banisa and tell them that for the last 10 months, we are still having dialogue. I don't know how, for example, those who depended on CDF are actually faring without an MP in place. So when it has to work around and there's no figurehead, there's no leadership, there's no voice in parliament, I think for us it's actually important that we move away from this. It's time we actually stopped holding hostage, democracy hostage. We do a lot of hostage holding when it comes to democracy. And how do we do that? We throw stumbling blocks into the way of doing things. Like for example, now we do not have IEBC in place. But God knows if anything ever happens. We already have got the case of Banisa, and we can actually act. And 4 other areas of representation do not have their members of MCAs who died, some I think in Kakamega. Can't remember the others, but at least I can remember Banisa. There's somewhere in Kakamega, and 3 also Kisi, then some 2 other places. So all those people are waiting, no representation, nothing. But the people who've actually stole that process are okay, going on with their business. Not feeling a thing. This honestly is an assault on democracy, because democracy is not just at the bigger scale, at the national level when we're talking about the presidency. That democracy should also count even at the ward level. Yeah.
And of course, in terms of policy, this is where your expertise comes in. In terms of implementing, even the Kriegler report, we had it, they made a resolution on such incidences. We have had various reports that are currently lying in Parliament buildings addressing these kinds of issues. So is it implementation, or what is the problem?
A lot of those good reports that we put in place, some of them have actually been implemented.
Yes.
Quite a number of them. There is a way those reports, the proposals therein, find their way into policy. A lot of times, of course, people expect that the way a report has been done, it can be implemented that way. These inquiry reports, these commission reports are not properly policy structured. They don't have the policy framing, thinking, and even the way of going about it. So quite a number of them end up being implemented. They might not go in the form and format that is actually in the reports. Yes. And sometimes people want to actually run away with the thinking that they entirely weren't implemented. Of course, there are cases like if you were to look at the Ndungu report, so many other reports, some key issues are normally left out. But looking at the NADCO report, I am hoping that the NADCO report, as it were, it was quite a little bit unifying, not that, what do I call it? Not as divisive as BBI was. So the issue of implementation also talks about resources, availability of resources. It talks about political goodwill. There's much more to just proposals. Otherwise, there are so many proposals around, but there are other determinants to how then those particular proposals find themselves into policy and then into implementation and programs.
Yes. Yeah. And given that Parliament now resumes in a week's time, don't you think this should be given priority as opposed to these others that require constitutional changes?
It's true. I think IEBC, for example, should be given priority. Those 5 areas of representation have been denied representation, and it will be unfair for us as a nation to move on as if they don't exist. If democracy is denied anywhere within the country, it means that it can also be done elsewhere. So I think as a matter of priority, Parliament should run, first of all, with, or rather, not just Parliament alone, but all the key actors, including political actors outside of that framework, should actually work out to ensure that the IEBC issue, the IEBC selection, is actually prioritized. I think on the other side, for us, for UDA, we're good. We were good with what the president did. We'd love to see these actually worked on very fast, because we've been raving, because we wanted to go to the by-elections, compete in them, and also prepare for our grassroots elections, not just to comply with the ORPP, but to also popularize the party, anchor it, and have it working without a proper IEBC in place. We have got about like I said, about 7 million people who would actually come into our fold if properly now as members, if they register with the IEBC, as if they were to register as voters. But as it is, it's stalled. Yeah.
And of course, we have seen this not just this year alone, in the past as well. So one wonders, have we learned our mistakes? Because this is what propagates what we witness after every electioneering period.
That's why I think as a nation generally, I said this is the bad manners of a few people in the political class. But we as Kenyans really want things done. Every Kenyan is busy. They're trying to actually get on with their life. They hope, like for example, if I'm in Banisa and I have got a child who needs a CDF bursary, for example, in the presence, or rather, if the MP was around, you know that the way CDF is actually administered is not the same way it would be if in the absence of an MP. So, of course, we would love to say that it's okay. NGCDF has got an office, it has got a manager and everybody else. But the political leadership, the kind of ownership that comes with the presence of the patron who is a member of parliament, is missing now. But somehow you realize that that is not big news just because it's somewhere down there. And that's why the question about electoral malpractices is one of that question that we really need to start treating with the contempt it deserves. Because somehow MCAs are elected easy, clear, no problem. MPs are elected fine. Governors, everybody else who has got a problem down there goes to court, has that sorted. But then at national level, even where courts intervene, you realize that we still want to have extra constitutional, extrajudicial ways of doing things. And this, like I've actually said, we are in this situation extrajudicially. The president's hand was forced. Demonstrations, destruction of property, assailing the economy, to the point where the president said, okay, listen to the members of the church and said, okay, if this is the price we pay, then I'll put a post to it. But do you think we are being fair to the people who are not represented? We are not being fair. Yeah.
And of course, indeed, if you're just joining us, we are talking about the reconstitution of the IEBC. As we speak, anniversary towers do not have commissioners in place. And of course, there are various court orders they need to implement, as well as by-elections. And finally, the boundaries delimitation that is just a month away. Those are the issues that IEBC needs to handle. And if you're just joining us, the conversation went even further to look if the secretariat, which is currently led by the Chief Executive Officer Hussein Marjan, if they're able to carry out these particular initiatives. And that is not the case, because the Chief Executive Officer and the commissioners have various mandates from the IEBC Act. And of course, Maliba, in terms of even allowing what the Member of Parliament is proposing, if we see a scenario in the likelihood where, and this is just hypothetical, where the Chief Executive Officer can be able to act as a chair of IEBC, are we also going to witness what we witnessed back in the day between Chebukati and Chiloba?
The way we've structured our quote-unquote parastatals is that there is no executive board. Bar for IEBC, where the chair has got executive powers.
Yes.
Having the chair as the CEO is a little bit of a problem, because the CEO implements what the board does. So if he sits in, normally there is that a conflict of interest. You are at policy level, decision making, and you also at implementation. So a little bit of it grays the area. That is why, of course, other companies do that. But IEBC is an electoral, an EMB, and being an EMB, it's susceptible to political winds and problems. That is not a problem we really want to get into. We'd rather have a place where the chairman has got his complete powers and everything else. The CEO is here, and the push and pull is administrative and nothing constitutional. It can always be remedied within that framework that is that delimits the powers between the two levels. But having the two work together, in my opinion, I think that is not a very clever thinking, because we will fly right into a trap we don't want to get. Yeah,
like what we witnessed back in 2017.
What we've seen in the past, that is, no, there should be a clear delimitation between the Secretariat and the Commission. Yeah.
And of course, as we are coming to the close of this particular conversation, in terms of the boundaries delimitation, we do expect it to happen on March 2024. And of course, the parliamentarians are coming back in a week's time. The National Dialogue Committee report, which is currently before them, the committee recommended for the expansion of the selection panel. But as we speak, the selection panel has not even addressed members of the Fourth Estate. We are not even aware of the process. Where have they reached? Have they identified those commissioners? Because as we speak right now, there is a Herculean task before the commission itself. And of course, in terms of the by-elections, we've just heard from Maliba, there are Banisa, there is Kisia East, that is Awadi in Kakamega, and various other places. In terms of even as well as court decisions that are coming out from the corridors of justice, people who petitioned the elections in various constituencies, wards, even counties, are being fronted before the courts. And of course, once those courts makes those decisions, it will be upon the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, IEBC, to consider those particular matters. Now, Maliba, as we're coming close to this particular conversation, the parliamentarians are coming back. The president, once he comes back from Italy, should this be the first topic on the table, as well as from where you sit, is there good political will to ensure that these commissioners are put in place? From where you sit?
From where I sit, I think politically we've got a level of consensus. The president demonstrated sufficient goodwill to allow for dialogue. We've had NADCO run its course. It even went and came back at some point to take care of a few issues that hadn't been factored in. So I think the room for dialogue has actually sufficiently, in my opinion, been put to use. And when Parliament comes, I think it's time for us to kickstart this particular process. Of course, there are other issues around, there are bigger issues we are running with. We've got an economy to actually work on and stabilize. We've got other issues like the social health fund that we are working with. We've got issues in the judiciary that also needs to be worked around. By and large, there are quite a number of things that should actually be prioritized. But I think for this, there's not so much work around it. There's not so much. If it's increasing the membership, easy, we drop them in and get to move. So that way, I think it's one of those things that if I were to have a take of 5 that Parliament should actually run with, this should go top. A little bit of the issues that pertain to the budget, the Finance Act 2023, those for me should be the things that actually get to be prioritized. The projects that are currently being stalled because of court action and they need parliamentary intervention to remedy, we need to get on, because we need to get to a place where we stop talking. At this particular point, we are moving into the second year. This should be the end of talking, and now actually just sit down and do work.
And now, given that we're talking about that NADCO report itself as we wind up, in terms of these other issues that require constitutional reforms, we have heard from the Azimio Brigade clearly stating that if it is the creation of the office of the Prime Cabinet Secretary as well as the office of the opposition leader, it should go to the people. It should not be a preserve of the parliamentarians to decide if these particular issues will be included in our constitution. It should go for a referendum. What is your point of view on that?
I do not think that at the moment we as a country are ready for a referendum. We are not ready for any general election type of engagement as a country. The economy is just starting to crawl. We really need to put in a lot of work to strengthen and stabilize the economy. It will be tiring, it's fatiguing to take people back to elections, even before they see fruits of what they queued for in 2022. So it's neither wise, it's not safe. I do not think that the government is keen on actually having a referendum or even having a general election type of engagement going forward. If there are issues that need constitutional reform, I think largely the government would be more willing and leaning towards having those that can actually go the parliamentary way, especially if we have got a consensus. The others that will need anything other than a parliamentary process, that can wait, and probably until the next general election, we can have it as a question in the general election in 2027.
Thank you so much. That is Maliba Arnold, the Strategic Communication Advisor of the UDA party. Thank you for making time for us this morning. We have conversed what should happen in terms of the reconstitution of the IEBC, as well as the NADCO report that is currently before the National Assembly, and they're set to resume in a week's time. And of course, we're expecting to see if those matters will be conversed on the floor of the House. That puts a cap to our first conversation here on a news check on this, the last day of the month of January 2024. On the other side, after this short commercial break, will be in terms of the changing face of the land justice system. And in studio, we'll be having Honorable Justice David Mwangi, a judge from the Environment and Lands Court. We do have Edward Kimani, a bishop, and finally Elizabeth Ndugu, a vice chair of the Nairobi Law Society of Kenya. We do have those guests with us this particular morning, and we'll be conversing matters that are near and dear to your hearts when it comes to land issues. But first things first, let's take this short commercial break, and we'll see you on the other side of the break.